Yeah, so thank you so much for offering to do this. Would you like to sort of say just a little bit about yourself and what university you went to? I noticed you've got quite a few degrees. Do what your courses were when you graduated, that kind of thing.
So I did my first uni degree, I think I was about 23, so I was a bit of a late goer to uni. I didn't kind of step straight into uni from school, and I did a bachelor of, I was enrolled in a bachelor of psychology with honours, but I chose not to go ahead with that final honours year, so it kind of defaulted to a Bachelor of Psychological Science. And that was at the University of New England. So it's actually a regional university in Australia. I'm based in Sydney.
Yeah.
And so this uni is actually 7 hours away from Sydney, but I did my course online. And that was for a number of reasons. I suppose going to uni like later, by that time I was working full time and I lived out of home. So I just couldn't afford to stop work. And then I went back a few years later to do a master's. I chose to do a master's in community development, but my major or my core stream was in international development. And I went to a university in Sydney and I did that, but I did it at night. So I worked full time, but I did my master's at night. Actually, those 2 nights a week, I would race from work through Sydney traffic and like physically sometimes run to my class. I think my classes started, I think I used to do classes from 6:30 till 8:30. I'm pretty sure that's where my classes were.
Right.
But I guess I would do my study, like my readings and my any of my assignments would either be at night or weekends. I probably for the 2 years was pretty bitter on weekends that I was the one sitting and writing an essay while everybody else was out, at the beach or having beers somewhere. And I was like, I'm coming. I've just got to write this paragraph.
Yeah.
If I kind of think back on my, my pre-uni days, I went to Performing Arts High School. I lived in a dance studio. I turned up to English one day in my last year of high school and my English teacher said to me, "Oh, I thought you'd left. We never see you." Like I was not academically attentive. I was quite intelligent. I just never really did anything about it.
Right.
And if I kind of think of that journey from the end of high school until I went to uni, if you had have asked me at 18, 19, 20, if you ever want to go to uni, I was absolutely 100% no way. I'm never going to uni. Couldn't have even fathomed, like when I actually was like, I think I want to go to uni, I didn't even really know, I didn't know how to apply. When they applied, they asked me what my final mark was for my final year of school, and I was like, I have no idea. I don't even think I've checked. Like I was so disconnected from that academic process. I tried to enroll like into my first round of subjects and I just physically could not figure out how to enroll. And I was like, how am I ever going to pass this degree? I can't even enroll in the subject. This is a disaster.
Oh dear.
I'd never really written an essay in high school. It was literally how I've survived. I'm truly not sure. So it was a real learning curve for so many reasons. Like obviously a lot of that, the content that I was learning, but those real fundamental experiences of learning were completely foreign to me.
Okay, that's interesting. Cool. So, so what made you choose a psychology degree? That kind of leads on quite nicely because when you said you never thought you wanted to go to uni and then you chose psychology. So what made you choose a psychology degree?
Oh, look, there's an incredibly long backstory, but I suppose in a really small nutshell, I did a period. So we used to have a thing in Australia where you could apply for, and it was quite a large application process for quite a small number of intake for nursing, but it was like it was a program that paid you to study, and it also did a much more traditional approach to nursing where you would learn on placement. Sort of how they used to teach nurses, so you do like short-term classroom stints and then you would go into the wards and you'd kind of do all that. So I did that. I applied for that and I got into that with the intention of I wanted to study medicine. I wanted to be a doctor.
Right.
And like I said, I wasn't academically focused at school, but I was quite bright. Like I kind of, if
Yeah,
I actually chose to do something, I could do it. But yeah, I did this nursing degree, and you know, I was getting the marks that I needed to then kind of proceed and sit for the medical like entry exam for uni, and
cool.
and I really loved the practical component of it. And I think what I really loved about it, like I'm not a squeamish person, I was very happy to do all the kind of gory, gross, you know, parts of it. But I was really, really drawn to the more kind of that real social connection I think that you can have with patients. And I was on a really large ward in one of Sydney's biggest hospitals, and you would often have women who were experiencing breast cancer, and one of the recommendations by the Breast Cancer Association was to put women experiencing that in the same room together. I used to find myself, you know, spending a lot of time in those rooms and connecting with these women and their experiences and really different ages in life, and I was really moved by the different kind of processes of acceptance that these women would have. You know, some were really liberated by the fact that they'd had a full mastectomy and didn't never had to buy a bra again. Like they were just like, oh my gosh, you know, whereas others were so crippled by the idea, you know, that was such a connection of femininity to them that they didn't have anymore. And equally to that, I was really distressed by some of the really poor empathetic connections of other nurses, and I was really bothered by it and was developing quite a high anxiety to going to work because I was just so just really distressed by the lack of compassion that a lot of nurses, not all, I think there's incredible nurses out there, but a lot of these nurses had. And so one day while I was helping this young, probably like, well, she was young because she's younger than I am now. So she was about 28, I think. And she had had an incredible breast cancer journey. And I was helping her shower, and it turned out that I ended up in tears, totally professionally inappropriate, and was kind of having this vent to her about how I was so distressed about this job. And, you know, it was like, this is not what I thought it would be. And and she just said to me, you need to leave this and you need to go and study social work, or you need to be a psychologist or something. And I was like, okay. And so, I mean, this truly speaks to just how little I knew about the process. I just kind of like got online and looked at degrees that I might be able to get into. And I just applied for a psychology degree. I truly didn't really know what I was getting myself into. I also knew that I wanted to be, I used to watch a lot of Law and Order, SVU, back in those days. And I desperately wanted to be his character is, I don't actually know what his character's name is, but the actor's name is B.D. Wong, and he was like this forensic psychologist that used to come in and assess some of their like really intense criminals, and I just desperately wanted that job. And so, you know, when I would study this degree and I'd be stressed beyond belief, like, you know, prepping for an exam, or my partner would kind of cheer me on from the, you know, the bedroom or the kitchen and be like, you've got this, BD, like you can do this. Like it was was just, I don't know, so between like wanting to kind of connect with breast cancer patients on a ward and watching way too much Law and Order SVU, I somehow came to, I'm going to study a psychology degree. And yeah, so I worked in makeup artistry for a little bit. I nannied for a family for a little bit. I managed a retail store. I did all these things. I think that's why when I ended up, you know, in uni at 23, I had some experience, like no academic experience, clearly couldn't enroll myself properly, but I kind of had some human experience. I had some human connection, you know, I'd
of course, and that's really important
in my personal life, but I'd also just done life a little bit more. So yeah,
I think that's really good. Cool. That was really, really interesting. Amazing. So after you did how much of a gap was there between your bachelor's and your master's?
Maybe 3 years, I think about I would say about 3 years roughly, yeah.
And what did you do in that gap?
So I finished my psych degree, and I was incredibly fortunate. I applied for a position with our state government as a child protection caseworker in like our social welfare department. and was successful. So I basically left uni like bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, totally fresh, thinking I was, you know, just a total whiz, and was basically eaten alive by the social welfare system. But it was it was one of the it was fabulous. It was one of the best first jobs that I could have had, and just so many lessons learned. Like it knocked me down so many pegs, which was great. Like I think it really made me realize that a uni degree is, I mean, I needed the degree for that job, and I think it's critical, but I think it's lacking so much in what it offers from like a practical learning perspective.
Yeah.
And it really connected me. I came from a reasonably privileged background. I grew up with a, connected family, and I grew up in a middle class neighborhood, and I've spent a little bit of time in the UK, and I know that you have, a better system in place where you have suburbs integrated of like lower socioeconomic and middle and higher socioeconomic communities in somewhat close proximity. We don't do that in Sydney at all. If you live in one suburb that's wealthy, you could be 45 minutes away from a suburb that's not. And the way that our city is set up is that you never really have to kind of come in contact with that. So it really opened my eyes to just the, just the social economic disparity that is in my own city, in my own backyard, that I just had no idea about. So
that's interesting.
It gave me like the thickest skin. Yeah.
Okay, that's good. What was your first job after your master's?
So I actually halfway through my master's, I moved positions. So a position came about that was really close to home. And one of the things I was struggling a little bit with in my other job was that I traveled all over the state. I traveled a lot, and it was kind of becoming a bit tiring. And so I applied for a position as a community development project manager, working in a public housing or a social housing community in the inner city that is going through a big, again, really quite similar. It's kind of based off a lot of the modelling that's happening in London with their public housing and that kind of renewal and regeneration of public housing. We're doing similar things in Sydney. And it was this really large, like 15 hectares of public housing, 3,500 people living on this space.
Wow.
With a big redevelopment plan. And so the government who were doing the redevelopment funded a local community organisation to hire somebody to basically support community members through that process. So I got that job whilst still studying my development masters.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
You're a consultant at University of New South Wales since 2017.
Yeah. So, and then talk about, these is like some weird serendipitous moments that sort of happened. So I also started to do, while I was working in child protection, and it kind of continued, I started to do some volunteer work, or I was accepted into a program working in India with urban slum communities in India. And they were in short stints, but it really kind of started to spark a real enthusiasm for working in South Asia and in informal settlements and in urban context as well. And very bizarrely, when I was working with this public housing community, my manager at the time kind of gave me a business card one day and said, "Oh, this guy, this professor from UNSW popped in the other day. He's something in urban planning. He might have some master's students to come and help out. Maybe just give him a call." And I was like, okay. So I emailed this guy, and he was like, "Yeah, so great to hear from you. Let's have a coffee." So we had this, work coffee. And whilst I couldn't offer him really anything for his students in the public housing space, he is this British professor that turns out to be this reasonably influential person in the international development space in the urban slum communities, and said to me, "Would you like some research work? I've got some research work going on the side. Would you be interested?" And I was like, yes, like, of course. So I started to do some work with him on a project that was funded by DFID. and was looking at innovation, grassroots, locally led innovation in urban slum communities or informal settlements in 4 different countries globally.
Wow.
And he was part of a consortium that was working on a project in Bangladesh with a really, really large urban informal settlement right in the middle of their capital city in Dhaka. So I did some work with him on that, and then he has just been incredibly generous and has just continued to provide and present really incredible opportunities. So I've done quite a number of bits of work on that, because that was 2 years of funding through the UK government that I had a number of projects on. We worked together on an urban resilience Asia Pacific conference that he ran in Australia. I'm working on a piece with him and the Australian National University at the moment in the Pacific, so looking at area-based approaches to disaster response in the Pacific. Truly, if ever I win some significant award in my life, I will absolutely commend everything that he has offered to me. He's been incredible.
That's amazing. It's amazing things that come out of someone just giving you a business card one day to doing amazing stuff like that. That's so cool.
Yeah, and I think my boss that gave me the business card actually kicks himself, because I eventually left the job to go and do more of this kind of international development work, and he was like,
oh dear.
So he's really wonderful, and I'm really incredibly grateful to him.
Are you still doing that?
I am. The consulting thing on LinkedIn is really hard. It's a really hard thing to document properly. So UNSW, I do a number of things. So I was working with him. So he sits under the Faculty of Built Environment, and it's all very urban and architectural kind of planning stuff.
Yeah.
But I also was incredibly fortunate to be asked to come and teach the core community development subject for their Masters of International Development. So that's the Faculty of Social Sciences, and that's the same degree that I did. And the woman who taught that subject for years, who taught me, who again I hold in such high regard, she she was doing some incredible research internationally on refugees and internally displaced people, and she couldn't run the subject, and so they contacted me and said, could you? And I was like, well, I don't have a PhD, and in Australia you have to have whatever level you're teaching at, you have to have the qualification above that. So
right.
Technically I could have taught at a bachelor's degree, but I'd a bachelor's level, but I shouldn't have been teaching at a master's. And the head of the school was just sort of said, send me your resume. And I was like, oh God, okay. And she rang me back and she said, I think you've got more practical experience than I do. You'll be fine. And I was like, oh, okay. So I had I think I had 10 days to figure out this course. And I delivered this course. And truly it was one of those moments where you just sort of go, the first night, I was absolutely terrified. I was just like, I'm such a fraud. But I had so much fun doing it. I just had such a wonderful time. And it was really reflective for me as a student, as a once student, and probably soon, at some point, another student again. And as a practitioner, it really kind of confirmed to me that, in a few short years, I have really learnt a lot. And it made me really grateful of the people that I had learnt that from along the way. And it really made me go, whilst I don't have a PhD and I'm probably not technically qualified enough for it, I felt knowledgeable in that space, and I, really kind of sat into it. I really loved it. I had such a great time doing it.
That's brilliant. How long did you do that for?
Just a semester. So unfortunately, it was one of those things where I got really great feedback. I actually had the head of school contact me and say, we've never had someone get this high mark. And I was like, I swear I didn't bribe them. I didn't bribe them. I may have given chocolate out some nights, but I didn't bribe them. But I was only on a casual teaching rate, and they hired a full-timer who had to have a PhD. And so just economically, and especially now, it's not viable at all for universities to be paying casual staff. So Yeah,
Yeah,
unfortunately, it
yeah,
was just a semester. But I have had, a number of occasions where they have like, that professor is like away for a week, and so you can get called in to teach a class.
yeah, yeah.
So I have a really good relationship there, and I hope one day that maybe it kind of gets offered up again.
That's really nice. I've always thought it might be nice because I quite like sort of speaking in front of people. I've always thought that might be quite a good thing to do. But I thought at one point, sort of halfway through uni, I could be a lecturer, and then realised I needed to have a PhD, and I really don't want to do a PhD. So
You do a master's though, you can teach at the bachelor level. So maybe that's like the
is that
alternative.
right? Okay, interesting.
Well, that's what it is in Australia. I'm not quite sure what it is in the UK.
Yeah,
But yeah.
I think it might be different in the UK. Okay, so what is your current job?
Oh, interesting. So 4 days a week I do something, and then 2-ish days a week I do something else. So today, my Wednesday, I work as a consultant I'm doing a contract for Australian National University. So I'm working on a scoping piece looking at area-based approaches to disaster response in the Pacific.
Nice.
So yeah, it's a really interesting piece. It's basically looking at the current way in which we respond to disaster is to go in that initial kind of response phase, and we go in as what's known as the cluster system. So we go in as like a team of people who are dedicated to shelter, a team dedicated to water, sanitation and hygiene, a team that have got education and gender, and everyone kind of goes in with their own specialty hat on, and they'll come together and they'll meet on site, in country, and they'll collaborate on that, but they're very much focused on their thing. And as you can imagine, that leads to a lot of duplication. It leads to a lot of siloing of experiences. And the biggest issue is that the transition from that humanitarian response, which is very crisis driven, and short term, that then transitions over to the development teams that come in and they do that longer term sort of, re-establishing livelihoods and safety, and there's a real disconnect between that. So this idea of area-based approaches is actually saying we don't want to respond per cluster. We want to actually take an area and look at how that specific geographic area has been impacted, and look at the kind of elements that make up the community's life within that space, and how can we respond more holistically, so that when we as the rapid response team move out and the development team move in, they actually move into a community that has started to kind of have that cohesion reestablished.
Yeah.
And the Pacific is obviously really at the forefront of kind of climate emergency and risk, but there's very little research done into that kind of area for them. So we're sort of scoping that out with a hope of maybe creating a larger project to look at that.
Okay, amazing. And what about, so is this your 4-day-a-week project?
No, that's my 2-ish day a week project.
Okay.
So that's like Wednesday, a bit of Sunday and some nights.
Okay.
So I work 4 days a week for the Ministry of Health. And I work in their prevention and response to violence, abuse and neglect team as a child protection policy advisor to them. So we write and review all policy for New South Wales Health relating to child protection. So policy and procedures for health staff to engage with children in emergency departments who might be presenting with risks or factors of child protection related issues. We provide training for all of New South Wales Health in relation to child protection. We do a lot of work to engage with our Indigenous communities in Australia around child protection, and culturally and linguistically diverse communities. We obviously have a really large multicultural population here. So kind of that child protection lens, but in the health system.
Okay, brilliant. Those both sound really, really interesting. Have you been out to have you been out to anywhere in the Pacific where you've been working?
I haven't. So I started this kind of when COVID hit, and so I can't go at this point in time. Yeah. So my entire sort of Pacific travel experience is a friend's wedding in Fiji a few years ago.
Wow.
Yeah. So no, all of my in-country development work's always been in South Asia. So I spent quite a lot of time in Bangladesh and India and Nepal. working over there, but nothing in the Pacific yet. So I'm really hoping there's conversation of creating a bit of a trans-Pacific travel bubble. So us, the Pacific and New Zealand, will all be able to kind of move around traveling within each other.
Mm-hmm.
So if that's the case, then hopefully I can get over and do some work over there. And just talking to all these people over there, and I really want to sit and have a cup of tea with them.
Yeah. So my next question was, and probably the most important question is, what skills do you think you got from your degree that you've used or have helped you in your career so far?
Yeah, I know. I saw this. You sent this through, and I was really like, wow. I feel like my psych degree for me, I've always say to people I would actually love to redo my psych degree. I feel like it was one of those things where uni was so foreign to me, and so many of those concepts I think you learn in psych, until you actually see them in practice, they just don't really mean a lot.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
You know, I never ever thought I'd say I'd want to do statistics again, but I'd actually love, I think I'll regret ever saying that, but I'd love to do that again and understand now that I see it in practice, in research, and that it just makes so much more sense. I think my psych degree gave me more skills around, more broader kind of professional skills, and actually like, you know, things I learned in subjects sort of thing. I definitely think, like I said, really, really set me up to be a really good multitasker. And to do a number of things at once. I think it really allowed, I've always been a really curious person, and, you know, as a kid always got into trouble because I would just ask, I wanted to just be a part of adult conversations and ask questions and understand things, and my filter isn't very good. And I think uni really just like encouraged that and fostered that sort of curiosity. And I think that has definitely carried me just through my career. I don't have a fear of just having conversations with people who are far superior and far more professional and far more experienced than me. I don't get crippled by that. And I think uni really promoted that.
Yeah, that's a really, really useful skill to have. Just being able to talk to anyone you need to talk to.
Yeah. And I think, you know, the reality is that person was me at one point. And while a lot of people I do think forget that, I also don't feel that I need to censor myself just because they've, you know, their ego's gotten too big and they've forgotten that they actually weren't once a student or, you know, a graduate, or, you know, new at something. You know, you can be 50 years into a career and you're always going to be new at something professionally. And I think a lot of people forget that.
Yeah, definitely.
I think psych really embedded, you know, I've always had this really innate response to social justice and just human behavior and just some of the inequities, I think. And I think uni, my psych degree really just embedded that desire to be curious about and passionate about social justice, really taught me to understand how mental health and trauma can truly dictate a person's entire existence and their children and their grandchildren's existence. You know, that intergenerational impact is so significant and so misunderstood, and so entrenched in everything that people come in contact with. And I just think it kind of emphasized my self-knowledge of human behavior and really showed me, it gave me the language to understand some of those things that I could observe or I could sort of conceptualize, but it, you know, kind of put some theory to that, or it put some examples to that, or
I know what you mean. I think I have a similar sort of mindset of, you want to know why people do something, you want to know why people behave in certain ways.
I think what I really loved about it is it's this really kind of odd disconnection. I don't know if that's the word, but for me it really highlighted, you know, it amplified the idea of complexity of humans, but at the same time it also showed just the total simplicity of humans, in that, you know, at the very core we are all so fundamentally similar in our kind of instincts and desires and you know, those basic things. You know, we just all want somewhere safe to live and you know, the opportunity to you know, raise our children or connect with people that we love, and, you know, basic things like share food together and embrace each other, and those kind of really core, those fundamental things that we do to connect as humans. But it also shows you the complexity of the mind and of the brain, and how for good and for not so good, that can really impact on a person's whole life and their whole kind of experience.
Completely. That was really, really interesting. Thanks. And my final question was, do you have any tips for new psychology graduates regarding jobs or careers or things like that?
I just think, unless you're really, really certain that you want to be a something, like I want to be a clinical psych, or I want to be a forensic psych, or I want to be, whatever. I think psych is one of those wonderful degrees that you're not really locked into anything. And I think in the first instance, that can be really overwhelming. Like, I often remember thinking, why didn't I just want to be a teacher, where you just like do a teaching degree and become a teacher? Like, I just always kind of would question that. But I'm so grateful that I did a degree that gave me a plethora of opportunities to sort of jump into. And what I really love about a psych degree now is, often when I look at jobs or I apply for jobs, I find myself in a position where, even if the required degree is actually not what I've got, people are quite willing to consider a psych degree as comparative to, whatever they had been asking for. So, I've noticed it. There's been a few times I've looked at positions with like an education degree is required. It's not a teaching role, but it kind of wants to know that you can, connect and share experiences with people. Or, there's a few positions where, like, business development is really is a key kind of thing. And again, that's just being able to understand and engage with people. So I think, unless you really, really know what you want to do, be really open to just testing out different things, because it leads to really interesting opportunities. I think if my current self could tell my younger self, I think I don't know what it's like in the UK, but you can do a whole psych degree here and do no practical. There's no required prac attached to it. So you don't
when you say practical, do you mean sort of like work experience, or do you mean conducting? No, I didn't do anything like that.
And I think that is a huge regret of mine, that I didn't just go and find that for myself. Because like I said, so many of the concepts that I was learning just didn't really make any sense to me, because you just didn't have a way to apply it. So, I guess if people are in a situation where they're not currently employed and they do have some time on their hands and they are wanting to just gain some knowledge, if I could do my time again, I would have reached out to, like, there's some wonderful programs here that work with young autistic children, and that do a lot of those kind of assessments that you learn about, that cognitive assessment and understanding of cognitive behavior and different types of therapies that just, didn't really make sense until they made sense, sort of thing. So I would definitely say, like, go and do that. Yeah. And I think just take risks. Like, truly, I didn't do a gap year, and at 30 I convinced my partner to sell everything that we owned, and we attempted to move to the UK, which failed miserably. But we're so happy we did it. And I think if you have those opportunities, if someone says to you there's a job in Zimbabwe and the job interests you, and Zimbabwe is a reasonably safe country to go and live in, go and do it. Like, no one ever did any of those things and then afterwards says, oh gosh, I really regretted doing that fabulous experience. Like, it's terrifying at the time. You're totally out of your depth. But just do it.
Totally,
just take it. And just,
agree with that.
There's this really fine balance, I think, between, there's never ever, I was thinking about this before I spoke to you, there's never been a job that I've taken that I was probably actually truly qualified to do. Like, qualified in the sense of, like, I had the degree that it asked for, and I had done some work experience. I'm a true believer in this idea that if you're hiring somebody and they meet all the criteria of a job, they're probably overqualified for the position and they're not going to stay for very long. So for me, the whole idea of employment is to grow and develop. So there's a fine balance between, like, obviously being confident that you can probably do the job, but also being a little bit bold and brazen and just learning along the way. Like, there's not a lot that you can't learn through a Google search anymore. And I just think, like, take the risk, be confident in your ability to learn it on the job if you need to. I'm not saying to go and lie about your experiences or
no.
But I do think that there's I often look at job positions and I just think, I mean, we know there's incredible research out there that says that, you know, a man looks at a job description, and if he's eligible for, I think it's about 55% of it, he'll apply. And women will look at a job description and they won't apply until they're eligible. I think it's for about 85 or 95%.
I've heard something similar. Yeah, I think it was, who was it? Sandy Toksvig said on Desert Island Discs that she could, like someone will ring up a woman who's like a really senior woman who's got all the qualifications for a job, and she'll say, oh, I think I know enough to do it. And you could ring the most junior man and he'll say great, and he'll go out and buy a book on how to do it. Like
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
I've always thought that was really interesting.
Yeah. And I think for new graduates, especially women, I think, you know, that's the time to just be really bold, and just take the risk, because the reality is, and I don't want to turn it into like a man hating exercise or anything, but I'm incredibly passionate about those opportunities for women. And I've seen that in my professional career, where you start to see, you know, I mean, arguably a lot of women come out with higher graduate marks than men. And then somehow it's this totally bizarre, weird race where women come out ahead, and somehow this sort of starts to happen. And before they know it, they're sitting back here, and, you know, men or these young guys that had, you know, far less marks than they did, just sort of raced on ahead because just allow for that. So, like, get in the ring, go, be involved in it and throw yourself forward. And what you don't know.
I think that's really good advice. I think something my mom's been saying to me is, even if, you know, I see job specs where I think, oh, I don't quite have the right qualifications, I can't do this, or blah, blah, blah. And she says, well, if you think you might enjoy it, apply for it anyway, because they're not going to hire someone who they think they can't do the job. If they hire you, they think you can do it, and you probably can. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely. And we had said at the beginning of this, mums are always right. So, you know.
Yeah, indeed.
That's the biggest lesson. Yeah, I think
Brilliant.
that. And the other thing, and this is something I'm actually have been self-talking to myself lately, is as early as you can, get a mentor, have a professional mentor. I think, again, that's something I would have liked to have done earlier. And I've definitely had people in my career that have become that by default, whether they kind of knew it or liked it or not. But it's definitely something, you know, I'm definitely at that stage of my career where I will look to actually pay a mentor, like have somebody that I have regular professional development conversations with, that's not about a friend telling you that, oh, you're really good and you should go for it, and you know, it's actually someone that's saying, no, actually, you know, that's probably not quite for you, or how do you feel that, you know, why is that important to you, or I think that's something I would have liked to have probably embedded into my professional landscape probably a few years.
That's good advice. Yeah, nice. Great. Well, thank you so much for being an interviewee. This has been so lovely. So thank you so much for volunteering to do this.